Hello everyone and welcome to the UK NEQAS BTLP online event. I'm Richard Haggis, the Scheme Director for BTLP, and I'm proud to introduce today's webinar session, which is a UK NEQAS update. I'm going to do Katie's presentation, and I'm due to give the second presentation, so there will be a seamless transition between myself to myself. And then our third presenter, you'll be grateful for the fact that that isn't me again. And I'll hand over at the end of my second presentation to our third speaker. Okay, so Katie was going to talk to us all about preparing an exercise, or what happens at UK NEQAS. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to talk about some numbers. We're going to go through the stages of an exercise, what we do, when we do it, which testing we do, all of that kind of thing. And then finally, we'll look at some similarities and differences between a UK NEQAS centre and a hospital transfusion laboratory. So first of all, we look at BTLP and numbers. Well, first of all, to say that there are 31 staff in the unit where we work, but that is shared with haematology. So haematology and BTLP are both in the same unit. We have currently got 5 BTLP staff, 7 admin staff, 3 packing staff, a couple of IT people, and there are 14 members of the haematology team. And we currently have a temporary project manager who took time to help us move into our new premises. And throughout this, I'll be showing you pictures of what goes on, and you'll at least get a feel for where we work now. We've moved relatively recently, and so lots of new pictures to show you. This is for BTLP itself. We currently have just over 1,200 participating labs, and they come from 54 different countries. We have 11 different exercise types that we send out. So we have the PTT, the pre-transfusion testing, which is the 3 different types that we have, which is R, E, and T. Most of you won't do T exercises, but that is one we have to prepare separately. We have FMH, we have ABO titration, point of care testing for D-typing. We have the 2 DAT schemes, which I'll be talking about in my presentation after this one. Then we've got genotyping, that's red cell genotyping, extended red cell phenotyping, and antenatal titration. Katie's added it up, and all of that adds up to 47 different distributions that we send per year. And it requires us to prepare and bottle 179 different sample pools each year. And all told, in a year, we distribute about just under 66,000 samples across the year. Oops, apologies for that. And Katie just wanted to add this on, that we do, there's 127 different reports that we will write. So an example of, it seems odd that we've got 47 distributions but 179 reports. But for example, for an R exercise, we issue somewhere in the region of about 6 different report types for an R exercise. So what Katie's done in this presentation now is to look through the stages of what we do, and just to give you a flavour of what's going on at the moment at UK NEQAS. So when we say -5 weeks at the beginning of this, that's 5 weeks before the exercise is due to be distributed, or D-Day as we call it, distribution day. So we have to plan the exercise, we create a batch file with all the information in it, and we order material for the exercise. And at the moment, we've got 5 exercises in this stage of planning. Ordinarily, ABOT2 and 22E4 wouldn't be done at this time, but in order to, because of the end of the UK financial year, we've had to prepare and make the orders slightly earlier. And these are the batch files that we've got currently. They sit behind Dee, who a number of you will have spoken to over the last few months. And she's the guardian of the batch files. And all of these are the exercises we're currently working on at the moment. So then 3 weeks before a distribution, we prepare the paperwork. So that will be the cost sheets, the exercise instructions, and we receive the material and we do what we call pre-acceptance testing. So that's ensuring that the material meets the requirements that we need. And currently that is 22 ANT2 and 22 ERP1 are in that stage. And this is the UK NEQAS laboratory. So lots of familiar things that you will see in haematology and transfusion labs around the country. You know, in the background there, you can see a Sysmex machine, BTLP stuff here with various little centrifuges. And this is where both haematology and transfusion do all their preparation and their testing. Here's a couple of haematology members of staff using one of their analyzers. So between 1 and 2 weeks before distribution day, we pool material, we test it again after we've pooled it, we then bottle it and test it again after we've bottled it to make sure we've put the right stuff in the right bottles. And at the moment, we have 1 exercise that's in that stage. And when we're testing these exercises, it's a huge amount of laboratory work. So when we come to bottle it, which is the next stage, we have this beautiful state-of-the-art bespoke bottling machine that works beautifully every time we use it. You know, the first time I saw it being used, within 2 minutes, it had shot blood across the room. So every now and then it doesn't go quite to plan. But the bottling machine is connected to a very large bag of red cells, as you can see there. So that will be one of the patient whole blood samples that we're now going to prepare 800 to 900 samples of. There's a picture of Arnold looking very cheerful as he's doing the bottling. In his hand there, you'll see a whole series of labels, and those labels will be for that material that's being bottled at the moment. All of our labeling of the samples is done by hand. So Arnold will be labeling all those samples as they come out of the machine. And one of our critical points here is that we never have more than 1 pool of material in the laboratory at one time. And Arnold will label them. Somebody else will then reconcile the labels to make sure we haven't got any left over before we bring any other material into the laboratory to bottle. A week before an exercise goes out, well, we package samples up, we check data entry on the web page to make sure that's working correctly. And at the moment, that is the case for 4 different exercises. So all 4 of those exercises are going out next Monday. So we're doing those final stages of packing and testing of the web pages. This is our packing area. That's Jack sitting there busy on the computer, but you can see piles of different envelopes. These will be all going to different destinations via various different couriers, and there will also be piles of envelopes depending on what needs packing. So there are some participants who don't do cross-matching, so they don't receive any donor samples. So we have different combinations to pack as well. Just to give you an idea of how many samples there are at the end of the bottling process, That is in that the corner ones are basically one set of samples to be distributed for one exercise, and that's the stuff that's going out on Monday. Although to be fair, that has been packed now, so those shelves will be largely empty, except with a few spare samples that we've got that we can send people. The packing, much like the bottling, is done manually. So we have 3 members of the packing staff who will sit around with various samples and pack all the participants. They'll have a checklist for each PRN as to what's required, and then they will put them into the clamshells, and then the clamshells will go into the envelopes. And that's basically how we pack. So if we very occasionally do, you know, send you 2 donor W's out or something like that, you know, we do expect that there will be the odd occasion where something goes wrong in a manual process. But by and large, I think you get the material that you're expecting. Then we have D-Day, dispatch day, in which the samples are dispatched, and we'll send the emails out to let everybody know what's there. We don't have anything in that stage at the moment, but we will on Monday. And that's just what it looks like when we've completed the packing. So all of those grey sacks at the back, they're all Royal Mail sacks for everything that's going out in the UK. And the green bins and the boxes are all things that will be going overseas with couriers, and lots of paperwork for, you know, to describe the material that's gone out so that it can get through customs. And all of that will be being collected by Royal Mail or by DHL or other couriers on Monday. And there's Matthew earning a well-deserved rest after packing all those things in our rather lovely new tea room that we've got. So what happens after dispatch? Well, obviously there's dispatch until the exercise closes. We do a series of tests. We send 3 sets of samples to ourselves, and the first set that arrives, we'll do what we call day 1 testing on. That's if it arrives on day 1, but we test it on the day it arrives. We'll also answer queries during this period, and we'll send out repeats. And I'm sure a number of you have contacted us for an extra sample, or you need one to confirm some testing, and we send those out. We haven't got anything in that position. So because we haven't got anything in that position, Katie's obviously just thought she'd show you a lovely picture of what's directly outside our new building, which is the River Gade. And that behind the River Gade is a nature reserve. So we're very lucky that we're now next to a nature reserve as opposed to a hospital car park and mortuary where we were before. Right up underway till closing day is the next stage. And that's the final day where we do testing. So another of the sets of samples that have come with us, we perform closing day testing on. And that's so that we know that we're getting the same results at the beginning of the exercise and at the end of the exercise. The third sample that we sent to us, we keep at room temperature. And that's if we think the material looks like it's deteriorating, we'll test the samples that have remained at room temperature, because obviously we're sending stuff overseas and there's a fair chance that some of it might have been delayed for a few days before arriving. We haven't got anything in that stage. Katie's just picked another picture of the laboratory here for you to demonstrate closing day testing, although to be honest, that is not closing day testing. That is 2 members of our hematology team using the flow cytometer, and as with everybody except Katie, we have to read the SOP on the flow cytometer because we haven't got a clue what we're doing, because we do it so infrequently. So the SOP is vital for us when we're using that. So our flow cytometer is the machine that's directly behind them. So after closing day, 1 day after closing day of the exercise, we actually close the exercise first thing in the morning. It's a manual process, so that's the point where the exercise will be completely closed. And we'll check our in-house results that we obtained on closing day. to make sure that the material has performed as we expected. We haven't got anything that we're doing that on at the moment. At this point, when we've closed the distribution, that's when the work for Katie and myself and other members of the senior team starts. But what we initially do is we sweep in data. So those of you that have forgotten to submit results, but you've saved them, we submit them on your behalf. And then we also have a look at the data to see whether everything looks fine, whether it needs cleaning, whether there's anything missing from it, that kind of thing. And over the next few days, we'll start drafting the text that we require to produce the reports. At the moment, we have one exercise which is outstanding for reporting, and that's 22 AMP 1, which we'll be getting around to in the next few days. I just wanted here to show a picture of Herb, who's one of our 2 IT members of staff. You can tell the IT members of staff because they've got the fancy keyboards, but they are absolutely vital to the work that we do, keeping all our databases monitored, making sure that all of the stuff that we're using is working in the perfect manner in order for us to produce accurate and timely reports. So after reporting, we have occasionally got amended reports to do for certain participants. We might have, we'll update our key performance indicators to check that we've done everything correctly. And we'll go into what's performance monitoring, and that's what we do for the UK labs. And at the moment, we're doing that for 3 different exercises. And Katie just wanted to give you a feel for how our performance monitoring goes. And it appears as me and Katie in a Zoom meeting arguing with each other, but actually we're really just discussing with a degree of enthusiasm. Quick bit about the similarities and the differences between hospital laboratories and a UK NEQAS lab. Well, we are inspected or assessed by UCAS. We've got ours in about a week and a half's time, but it's to a different set of standards from the ones that hospital laboratories are operating under. So we're under 17043, which is about proficiency testing, not 15189. We don't have the MHRA, but we do have NEQAP, which is the National Quality Assurance Advisory Panel. We have to produce a report for them every year on performance. Work comes in waves for us, so I think we could describe probably the last 3 or 4 days as bedlam because of testing and bottling, but we get periods of time where it's a little quieter. What do we do in terms of lab work? So I'll just describe the pre-transfusion testing. We test by all common technologies. So the 3 common column agglutination technologies, Grifols, Ortho and Biorad. And we also use Immucor, and we test by what would be considered the gold standard, which is tube IAT and tube enzymes as well. We hate calls about EQA errors. So when Katie and I have both received phone calls when we were working in hospital laboratories about errors in EQA exercises that our labs have made. And, you know, we didn't like receiving those calls, but we also don't like having to make them because it's not a pleasant thing to have to ring up and tell people that they've made an error. What I would say is thank you to all of you who are so nice about it when we're telling you that your results are out with the consensus. You're very nice. You do lovely investigations for us and tell us what might have gone wrong, which allows us to write up those things in our reports. Something that's similar for you, we participate in EQA. We participate in the Australian EQA that's provided by the Royal College of Pathologists Australia. We make mistakes, just like you do. We make mistakes in testing, we make mistakes in material preparation, but what's key about this, and I think what's key about all of your participations in EQA, is that we learn from those mistakes. We have a quality system, and it will look very similar to your quality systems. We are self-funding, and I think that's important. So any price increases we put is really just about being able to fund what we're doing. And we're all NHS staff. We all work for West Hertfordshire Hospitals NHS Trust. And like all NHS staff, we love cake. That was Katie's final bit of the presentation. So thank you for that. I'll now introduce myself to do the next presentation, which is about the DAT scheme update. So for this presentation, I'm going to talk about what's happened in the last year to the DAT scheme, the organisational changes we've had to make, the scoring and the performance monitoring that's done, and then I'm going to just talk about the common errors that were seen in the last year or so. So, okay, it's slightly more than the last year, but we went live with scoring for participants in November 2020 with the 20 DAT4 exercise. And so this was the very first one where we used scoring at all. What we did find that because we'd started to introduce scoring and it was going to become an accredited scheme, we saw an increased demand for participation, particularly at re-registration in March 2021, so much so that we were really concerned about how much material we've got. So I'm going to talk about that first. And I've called this the problem of numbers. So each DAT sample that we prepare comes from one single red cell donation, and it's diluted, it's prepared, coated with cells, with antibody or complement if necessary, and then diluted in modified Alzheimer's solution, which gives us a volume of about 1 litre. So the cells are already significantly diluted. We think the maximum number of samples we can certainly get out of 1 litre is about 400. And you could say, well, why don't you add more Alzheimer's? Well, we could do that, or we could prepare smaller samples. But one of the problems of that is, obviously, if we do that, you just end up with fewer red cells. The volume of red cells is still the same, no matter how dilute we get it. So it's a real problem in terms of, particularly if you want to be able to test it on automation. So in March 21, as I said before, we saw this large number of additional labs requesting re-registration, and we had to temporarily stop overseas laboratories, non-UK laboratories, from registering for DAT because we were concerned that our primary role, which is to performance monitor the UK, was going to be undermined by that. And we wondered what the heck we could do about this. So here's just an illustration of what had happened over the course of a few years. I know this isn't a linear timeline, but I think it illustrates very well what we'd seen. And here we have it in March 21. We're hitting 400 participants, and it's continued to rise since that point. So we needed to put our thinking caps on and look at some complex maths, but actually we realized the solution wasn't as complicated as we thought. And so we came up with, why don't we prepare 2 sets of DAT material? We'll distribute 1 set to the UK and 1 set to those laboratories outside the UK. We'll keep the exercise numbers the same, and we'll add a suffix to the end of the thing to denote which distribution it is. It took us ages to come up with U for UK and N for non-UK. So we have the very first one of these distributions that went out like this was 21 DAT2U and DAT2N. Now, there are some advantages and disadvantages of this. As you can see, we'd already got quite a complicated packing process from Katie's presentation, and we've just added some more complexity to it. We've doubled the cost of our DAT material, and we're having to do more testing. So that's all got a knock-on cost. But it does allow us to have as many participants, or certainly getting upwards towards 800 if we need to, of participants. So that's really important. So those are the changes that were made. I'm now going to talk about testing and about scoring. And I just wanted to show you an example. So this is 21 DAT2U, and C day at the bottom, C/day at the bottom, or C/D means closing day. And this is the testing we did on closing day for this. What I want to draw your attention to is that in each of the different technologies, so Biorad on the left, and top right ortho, and bottom right Grifols, the last well is a control well. And this is intended, providing it's negative, you can report your DAT results. Now, the control well actually plays a function in our scoring system. So I just wanted to illustrate the testing so that we can see how the scoring works for those. So in the scoring, this is where you've got a negative control well, which is what you would expect. And the scoring's pretty simple. So if you report a false negative result, we'll give you 60 points. If you report a false positive result, we'll give you 30. If you get the coating wrong, so you report complement where it should be IgG, then you'll get 60 points. But if you report the correct coating molecule, but you add the other one on as well by mistake, then you'll get 30 points for that. Unable to interpret is not an acceptable answer when the reagent control is negative. So if you put unable to interpret, you get 30 points for that. Now here's the scoring when the control is positive, if you've included it. The only difference is that if your control is positive, unable to interpret does not accrue any penalty, because you can't make a conclusion when you've got a control well that's positive. So that's the only difference between the two scoring tables. It looks complicated, but realistically, it's not that complicated. Your score is cumulative over the last 6 samples that were scored. So if we've taken one out of scoring, it'll go back one more sample. As with pre-transfusion testing, 0 to 79 points is satisfactory, 80 to 99 points is borderline, and anything greater than or equal to 100 points is unsatisfactory performance, or up, as we would call it. There's 50 points, just as there is in PTT, for not returning results. If you don't return results in 2 of the last 3 exercises, which is your 6 samples, then you will be deemed unsatisfactory performance for return. And anybody that has unsatisfactory performance will get a letter from me asking them for an investigation into what they've got and what happened, and then we'll get to the bottom of it and hopefully improve their performance. I'd have to say at the moment, most of the unsatisfactory performance letters we send out are for not returning results. I'm now going to just very briefly at the end of this talk about the main errors that are made that we see. Switching samples or results, or making data entry errors. These are common errors that occur across all our different exercises. So you know, they still occur, and they occur in DAT as well. People still making an interpretation, an incorrect interpretation, based on a positive reagent control. So we'll get people reporting positive IgG and C3D, but they've got a positive control well, so they don't know whether it invalidates the other two results. Fewer people are doing this at the moment, recording tests with polyspecific reagents only, so they don't use monospecific, which is fine, but then reporting it as positive IgG and C3D. So in effect, telling us what's in the reagent rather than what's actually coating the cells. So it's important that if you only test with polyspecific reagents, the only results you can reliably report is positive or negative. And finally, the recording of mixed field results as uninterpretable. So I'm just going to briefly talk about this. So you get a mixed field result in an ABO. The ABO grouping, it's a clear dual cell population. You've got cells at the top that are positive and cells at the bottom that are negative. You can't determine what the patient's own group is without doing further testing or investigation, so you cannot report a blood group. Uninterpretable in this situation is the correct result. However, in DAT, first of all, results, and I appreciate these are not that clear, but often they aren't true dual cell populations. You actually see that cells are spread throughout the gel or throughout the column. So you're getting some cells that are clearly coated, some cells that are less well coated, and some cells that appear not to be coated. That's not a true mixed field population. That's just a weak reaction that's spread throughout a column. Although I will accept that your automation may call it mixed field. But I think most of the manufacturers would say that a mixed field result in automation needs to be investigated and a manual decision on that result taken. But even if it is a true mixed field, a mixed field in a DAT is a positive result. It means that there are circulating cells with either antibody or complement bound to them, and that's a positive result. The only thing you don't know is the reason why you've got a mixed field, and that could be a transfusion reaction. It could be various reasons for that, but that is key. Mixed field in a DAT is a positive result, and I think if you take any message away from this, that would be a good one to take. And that's it from me. So I'll now hand over to our, I was going to say third speaker, but as it turns out, our second speaker, which is Martin Maley. I'll invite Martin to switch on. I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll invite Martin to put his video on and to share his screen. Martin worked for NHS BT for as long as I can remember as head of RCI. And he's now working as a senior lecturer in biomedical sciences at the University of Sunderland. He's also a member of the UK NEQAS steering committee, so we didn't have to go far to find him. And amazingly, he's doing a presentation which is not about anti-G. I'll hand it over to you, Martin. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. I thought we'd get through the whole day without mentioning anti-G, but obviously not. So yes, I'm going to talk about the use of NEQAS's TACT scheme in a university setting. So if anybody's not familiar with TACT, it is the NEQAS training, assessment and competency tool, and it involves randomly generated transfusion lab scenarios. It's overwhelmingly, as you can imagine, used in hospital transfusion labs for, amongst other things, monitoring competency of BMS staff. I did find out that it is actually being used in a single higher education establishment, but only really as a lecture aid. So I suppose the next question is why would I want to use it in a university setting? I kind of flipped that on its head and asked why it's not really being used anywhere else, I suppose. I mean, there's any number of reasons. It could be that universities don't know about it. It could be that a lot of the hematology and transfusion modules, a bit like mine when I arrived, is what I would describe as transfusion light. Or it could be that some people just don't think it's actually appropriate in that setting. So the actual rationale for it was, I left NHS BTs, which I'd said about a year ago now. And when I left, I actually asked for some feedback from the hospital transfusion lab managers in the Northeast area as to what they wanted to see in trainees and what might be missing. And the feedback that I got was that some of the trainees are not lab ready. They're not able to hit the ground running. They don't know about guidelines, have not come across guidelines, and don't know about current practice. Just for clarity, we're talking about students here who have not been on placement. So PTP students, placement students, apprentices, they will have had experience of this. But we're only actually sending 10, maybe 15% of our students out on these sandwich placements, and they're getting 40 weeks of exposure to the laboratory. I don't know why we aren't giving the ones who don't go out on placement a lot more. And as I've said, the module, the hematology and transfusion module at Sunderland was light on transfusion. So I certainly wasn't going to do all this work myself. So I've enlisted the help of what I would call a project student. So very early on, I found a student who has actually been on placement, but hadn't actually been in a transfusion lab yet. She had done some hematology, but no transfusion. Had some very productive meetings with Claire at NEQAS, who was very, very helpful indeed. Got a couple of trial licenses, and we did a walkthrough of the system myself with the student. And at that point, I kind of sent the student off onto the system and asked her to report on a couple of things, what she thought was good about it and what was bad about it from a student perspective, any possible improvements, some of which NEQAS Claire will already be working on. A summary of the basic instructions, because this is going to be used by students rather than BMSs, some more robust instructions were probably needed. And then we were going to sit down and think about the possible uses that we could use it for at Sunderland. The instructions that came out of that for the students to use, we made sure they were easy to follow. We made sure they were very detailed so that at any step, if they got stuck navigating through the system, they'd be able to find their way. We made sure that it included screenshots from the system. We made sure it was student focused, and we made it available to all of the students at any point that they wanted to go on the system. I'll come back to that in a second when they went on. So the initial introduction of this to the students was that it was introduced to them in one of the two blood transfusion lectures. It was actually mentioned in both, but we went through the stages of it in one, looked at some of the screenshots and the process itself. It was going to form part of the workshop, which would have been about halfway through the live period that we were going to run it for. There was an exam question, a new exam question that was put in, which was on the steps in the pre-transfusion process, which TACT would obviously help them with. And in order to increase engagement, we made it into a competition. So this is what the competition was going to look like. Out of the, I think there was 65 students that were in the hematology and transfusion module. 25 of them expressed an interest in taking part in the competition, because obviously the work they'd be doing on this would be out with the normal sort of scheduled hours that they'd be doing on this module. We purchased 4 new licenses. I put on some extra sessions looking at grouping, looking at antibody ID, and looking at TACT itself. We had team leaders for those 4 teams. We split them into 4 teams. Team leaders chosen. Mostly those were people who had been on placement, at least in a hematology lab, so they did have experience of being in a laboratory. We were going to set this away with the scoring and the prizes to be concerned, but I made sure that the students knew there would be chocolate involved, so that was definitely going to keep them engaged in it. And we were ready to go live. So we were about a month into the module that had the transfusion lectures, and we were ready to go live in mid-October 2021, and everything was going to be brilliant. And then we had a cyber attack at the worst possible time. And this took down the entire university. So what did that look like? So as I say, that was in the second week of October, and everything was down fully for 2 weeks. So Outlook, email, Teams, OneDrive, Canvas, which is our learning environment, everything was down for over 2 weeks. It took us quite a while to get caught up. The students lost their reading week, which then had to be put back in December. And it probably, I would say, this should probably be in the conclusions, but I think it set us back about 8 weeks, unfortunately. So we went ahead with the workshop anyway. That was in December, which part of the workshop was looking at the pre-transfusion process. We did some interactive group work. And as I said, I also set an exam question on it. And all of the students who had originally said they were interested in being in the competition and using the system did confirm that they would still wanted to do it. So we finally went live. We had another training session just to quickly go through the system for any of the teams that wanted to join. And we went live in mid-December. And as I say, the setback that we had probably is what has cost us the most. You go live in mid-December, you've then got Christmas, you've got New Year, everybody's off. You've then got revision week in the middle of January or the second week in January, and then you've got January exams going on for 3 weeks. So as far as follow-up was concerned, I had some individual meetings with each of the teams in mid-January just to make sure that they were okay with the system and they were getting on all right. We had a look at the completed scenarios. By that time, not all of the 4 groups had engaged. I think 3 of them had. We looked at the completed scenarios. I addressed any concerns or any questions. So at this stage, there were students asking about blood selection, even had students asking about why they don't have to exclude anti-KPA and anti-LUA. So getting that information into them at this early stage is definitely a bonus. They were asking about special requirements. We even had students that were rejecting samples on the TACT system because there was no diagnosis and no transfusion history on the request form. So yeah, they were people after my own heart there. It's actually still running. I'm running it until the 1st of March. I suppose the one worry at this stage is that they finished the hematology and transfusion module at the end of January. So what is the benefit for them? As far as there's no extra benefit as far as their degree is concerned. It's not going to increase any of their exam marks. So the benefits would be you've got third-year students who are leaving in June. They've had experience of guidelines. They've had experience of the laboratory flow in a blood transfusion lab. They've seen blood selection. They've seen special requirements. They've communicated with the lab. There's a function in TACT where you can phone the lab up and leave a comment. And it's obviously good stuff for them to have on their CV. And if it comes up at an interview for a trainee post or a BMS post, it's good that they can talk about that. So just to sweep up with what went well, I think there was good interest and good initial engagement on the system. The students really liked the system. They found it reasonably easy to navigate once they've been on there. The instructions they thought were good. The pre-transfusion workshop seemed to go well. There was good engagement in that. The exam question itself was actually well answered. Whether that had anything to do with them going on the TACT system or not, I don't know. No real patients were killed, which I suppose is the case with TACT all the time, but with students, it's a competition, not competence. So as you can imagine, when some of the students went on the system for the first time, the brakes were off, I suppose is the phrase I would use. What didn't go well? Well, obviously the cyber attack has cost us quite a bit. The 8-week break meant the instructions had to be revisited. So we have had to do that twice. Christmas and New Year got in the way, as I say, exams got in the way. And then at the end of January, beginning of February, they're starting new modules. So it's only the ones that are really keen and really interested that are staying engaged with the system. As far as the future is concerned, I'm kind of thinking about using it at stage 2, or maybe that's pushing it a bit far, but it might just be for familiarity and for people who aren't going to be going on placement next year. We need to get the timing right. I think if we'd started in mid-October, it would have been much better. I'm working on increasing the transfusion content in the module even further for the stage 3, and maybe some bigger and better prizes to try and pull in some more interest from the students. And that is the end of my slides, but obviously I'm happy to take any questions that anybody might have. Thank you very much.
It's now time for us to go into the Q&A session. Thank you, Bella, in the background, for putting that up. Claire, I'll invite you to turn your screen and microphone on, because I think you're going to very kindly chair the question session. So I'll hand over to you.
Sure thing. Okay, so I think this is a question for you, Richard. This audience member has asked, well, I said, I heard you using Immucor. Could you make an anti-A and anti-B titration test for Immucor Neo devices?
Well, we do offer ABO titration as a scheme, though I would have to say that it's generally anti-A that we offer for titration. I think it probably depends what people want it for. If they're wanting it to do ABO titration as part of sort of renal transplants and things like that, for ABO incompatible renal transplants and other transplant purposes, then it's the perfect scheme. If it's for other things like testing whether they're high titer anti-A or anti-B, we don't currently have a plan for doing anything like that, although we are looking in the next couple of years at doing donor testing as a potential EQA scheme, but yeah, we're only at the sort of feasibility stage for that, and that could obviously include anti-A and anti-B titration as part of that, with a view for people to determine whether things are not high titer antibodies. But the ABO titration scheme does offer that.
Okay, and another question from the audience was, we use ortho and in most of the exercises get positive reaction in the control, which makes the result uninterpretable. And the question is, what is the suggestion or future plan to overcome this issue?
It's a very good question, and it is something that we are aware of. We're unsure and exactly what the cause is. We know that there are potentiators used in ortho which enhance reactions, and so occasionally strongly positive DATs cause problems in grouping with control wells. Claire, as you will know, the two of us have been in lots of conversations with ortho, and ortho themselves are trying to investigate these phenomena and looking at the makeup of their cassettes and trying to see whether there's a pattern as to the results that they get in relation to things like the age of cassettes, the age of our samples, all of these kind of things, whether the samples are at room temperature or directly out of a fridge. And I think we could probably confirm that there was no clear pattern, was there, either in ortho's testing or in the results we did in our own lab. We know this is a problem, but we also know it is a problem with patient samples as well. I used to use ortho, and it, occasionally would get a patient sample that you'd have to refer somewhere else for the DAT because you got this issue with the control well. But we are continuing to investigate it.
Yep.
Unless Martin's got any good ideas.
Say to my remit now, that I'm afraid.
Okay, so we have a question from Kerry, who is my colleague on the UK Transfusion Laboratory Collaborative, to say, great idea to use TACT as a teaching tool for students, which I would 100% agree with. Can the universities reach out and purchase memberships? Can we promote the availability of this as an educational tool? Do you want me to answer that one, Richard? Martin, do you want to say anything first?
Well, yeah, I think it's a great idea that universities should be able to reach out, but yeah, how do we kind of get it to them? If it is the case that universities don't know about it, then if they know about it, it might make them sort of think about the transfusion content. I mean, when I was looking at mine, the sort of the reading list for the transfusion module didn't even have any guidelines or anything on it. It was all just textbooks. So that was the first thing I did, was to get the guidelines on the reading list and then work sort of from there to try and get much more sort of current practice element to it. So yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Well, the answer to the
Oh, sorry, go on.
Oh, well, the answer to the first part of Kerry's question is Martin being here is evidence that universities can absolutely participate in TACT, and we can make it work. But as Martin will know from the multiple conversations that we've had, when you first sort of started with it, Martin, we did need to make a few adjustments, didn't we? And at the moment, the IT software company, Certus, are actually slightly modifying the software to allow what we're calling tiers of management. So you would have, at the moment, there's only 2 tiers. There's a manager or the administrator, and then all the members underneath that. But it became obvious that for it to work in a higher education setting, we would need an overall administrator, that would be Martin, and then underneath that, another layer of management, and then members underneath that as well. So, like I said, Certus are currently working on that at the moment. And there's other little bits and bobs in TACT as well, that the system was obviously, as Martin said at the beginning, it's very much geared towards hospital transfusion laboratories, but I don't think it would take very much to modify it further to make it much more applicable to a higher education setting.
I was going to just sort of not add to that, but ask Martin a question relating to it. I mean, obviously, you've gone in as a transfusion professional into a higher education setting now and can see the issue we have with training of people in transfusion. Do you think that combined with using something like TACT and people getting a feel for things like red cell selection and all of that kind of thing actually might benefit the profession in the long term? Might we get more transfusion interested biomedical scientists out of it?
That's what I was going to say. It's getting people interested in it, isn't it? Surely it can only benefit, but it does seem that a lot of the students are interested. They're interested in the sort of the niche things about blood selection and exclusion of antibodies and stuff like that, that they wouldn't normally come across until they're in a lab. And then, you know, the people in the labs have got to train them from scratch if they haven't been on any sort of placement. So anything that can be done in the higher education setting to get people get a little bit more practical knowledge down people has to be a good thing. I think it could just be the fact that a lot of the hematology and transfusion modules are not going to be getting run by somebody who, I mean, I've come from pure referral transfusion, which is even further away from just hospital lab transfusion. So this was the first thing I started looking at. If you've got somebody who's running that module who has come from a hematology lab, it might not be their first priority, I suppose.
Yeah. It looks like we've got a placement student actually in the audience. They say that they think introducing TACT to universities would be beneficial. And I don't know if it's the same person because they've put themselves down as anonymous, but how do laboratories sign up for TACT? And the answer to that is drop us an email to the btlp@ukneqas.org.uk email address, and I'll get back in touch with you to let you know how to go about doing that. Okay, we have another question. Oh, I have a few actually. We use Ortho. Our lab process when the DAT control is positive is to then perform using Biorad. There is no way to report that on the site.
What I would say there is, what result would you be reporting to people as the result? Would it be the Biorad result or would it be the Ortho result? If you're reporting for a patient the Biorad result, then report that result and indicate that it was done by Biorad on the system. It's absolutely fine to do that. We don't keep a register of what you use as your technique. If that DAT needed reporting through Biorad, then that's the technology that you've used to test it, and that's the result that I would encourage you to report. Would you agree with that, Claire?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Another question. Is it recommended to process sample results via the laboratory LIM system, or as opposed to worksheets or instrument printouts?
I would always encourage people, if they can, to use their LIM system to do their testing. I'd appreciate that you might have to do a little bit of modification to the way maybe you book the samples in. You're going to have to come up with a numbering system to book them in under as a sort of pseudo hospital number. But if you can test using your, as close to your normal procedures as possible, do it that way. When I used to do it, I used to process all my samples exactly through the LIMS. I used to even print a report out at the end with my results on it, and that was what I used to report the result on the NEQAS site. So it was as close to the testing that I did routinely, and I think I'd always encourage people to do that.
Okay.
I think we're getting towards the end, Claire. We're probably going to need to wind up. Shall we have one more question if we've got one that's...
There isn't any new questions, but just off the back of Kerry's question, there was 2 questions in one there actually, to promote the availability of TACT as an educational tool. And I just want to hand that one over to Martin, because Martin, I know that you and I are in future going to work upon, is it a presentation for BGS?
Yeah, there's we're going to do a poster for BGS, so that'll be the first sort of thing that we'll be doing, output from that. So yeah, we'll have a look and see how that goes down, and I need to get the thing wrapped up first, because it doesn't finish till the 1st of March, get the poster done, and then yeah, we'll see how we spread the word a bit further, I suppose.
Yeah, that would be really good if we could.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's all the questions that we have, Richard. So
well, that's worked out perfectly, hasn't it, as we come up to past. So I am afraid we're out of time, but my first thanks go to, I was going to say thanks to the speakers, but that seems a little bit self-congratulatory. So I will thank Martin in particular for coming and doing this presentation. I'll thank Claire for hosting the questions so well. There's also a lot of thanks that we need to give to some backroom UK NEQAS staff, Bella, who's been running things in the background. Many of you will know Bella from participant meetings in the past, and Jen Christie from UK NEQAS Central Office. We've also got Arnold, who's been keeping his eye on the questions with Claire. And I thank Dee as well for, she joined as a participant to make sure that you could all see everything correctly, so she could message us if it wasn't working properly. So a massive thank you to everybody. What I do want you to know is this is the first of 2 webinars that we're running. As it says on the poster there is another webinar called Learning from Experience, which will be have an educational bent to it, which is on the 21st of March. And we'll be sending out flyers and emails to everybody in due course, so that you can join that as well. UK NEQAS itself is active on Twitter and LinkedIn. If, unlike me, you're one of those people who do social media, I'd encourage you to seek us out on these platforms, and you can keep up to date with what we're doing throughout the UK NEQAS family. And finally, once we've closed this session, would you please take a few moments to respond to a short feedback survey, which will appear immediately. All your views and opinions are valued, and you know, some of these presentations here come out of the feedback we got from the last webinar we did in late 2020. So thank you once again, everybody, and I hope you're able to join us on the 21st of March. Thank you.